War never changes. Or so we've been told for about 20 years. Yes, in September, Fallout as a series turns 20, and I thought I'd take a look at its own view of the post-apocalyptic wasteland through the lens of a retrofuturistic 50s aesthetic. Now, up front, I only came to the series, well, after 2008, i.e. I've only really played Bethesda's entries into the series. I have looked into the history and sort of looked at what Black Isle were doing before, and I've obviously played New Vegas, which obviously had a lot of those same people involved, so I know sort of where they were coming from. I know basically what happened before and how it all fits in, what's changed, what bits of lore have been completely scrapped or adjusted to suit Bethesda's vision for it moving forward. And second of all, I do enjoy the fare of people like Oxhorn, Fudge Muppet and the Nth Apple, who do great analysis of lore. I'm not covering lore. I'm leaving that to the masters I've mentioned, and their channels are in the description below if you want to take a look, if you haven't already. Share the love. But as I say, I want to look at it from my own viewpoint of analysis, of what does the world mean, what do the various characters we see, what does the take on the world mean, because even the chosen aesthetic of this retrofuturism is an interesting design choice. The idea that there's this kind of alternate history in around the 50s, instead of the world splitting off and going, wait, we've got these wonderful little computer chips, the realm of the supercomputer and the microprocessor, isn't something that happened in Fallout's world. In Fallout's world, atomic was the way forward, and it stayed that way for well over a century after the end of the Second World War. We have power armor controlled by, at least as of Fallout 4, fusion cores, which are micro generators of nuclear energy that can explode quite catastrophically. It's a wonderful separate take of the world, even before the bombs dropped on October 23rd, 2077. 60 years from now, be scared. Even before then, there are so many interesting differences in the world. We have, like I say, the supercomputers and the microprocessors. We should have robot butlers. With only atomic power, they've managed it. We're doing something wrong, world. But of course, the interesting part, or the big interesting part, the big draw with Fallout is the fact that it's after the bombs fell. Whether it's only sort of less than a century like the first one, or whether it's like a good 200 plus years down the line, like in the most recent entry, Fallout 4. The interesting thing to take is how the world has changed. I mean, one of the things that people have slated Bethesda for doing, which I find interesting, is the fact that the caps as currency was intended like a stopgap until the world got back to currency. We see an element of it in New Vegas, the fact that there are different, like the Legion has their own currencies, the NCR has currency, as well as caps as well, it's kind of kept around, but there is a resurgence of currency, which the main sort of Bethesda series has neglected. I just think, playing devil's advocate for them, it's what people have gotten used to, and it's just easier. It was the same in 2, they kept it then, so Bethesda's carrying on the trend, it's a continuation idea. But the interesting part is how, we started in sort of Mariposa, we started on the west coast, and then Bethesda has kind of primarily taken it towards the east coast, which does give us not only different geography, but different accents, and different sort of mindsets, and different variations of creatures. How would something have evolved in Maine compared to how it would have evolved in California? There are things that are going to stay pretty similar, like ghouls are still humans who have been heavily irradiated, so the transition there is going to be fairly similar. But what about local wildlife? There aren't certain types of creature in certain areas. I know the rad scorpion's been explained as pets that grew, emperor scorpions, I believe. But it's all these things, how the world is constructed, that brings you in, that makes you go, this is a living, breathing world. And, whilst a lot of people have problems with, Bethesda's game engine, I also have my own fair share of issues with it, but I'm not going to get into it. This isn't a slate Bethesda. Because I love it. I do love the world. The fact that you can just go in and just shoot up some raiders, or, as of Fallout 4, build up some settlements, or whatever you choose to do. It is your world, and yes, there's a lot less black and white good and evil choices, but I think it's more robust as a world because of that. It can accept you living in it without drastic changes to various things that you might want to look at down the line that are no longer available because you've made X, Y, or Z choice. And that's what I like to see, a living, breathing world, which obviously it gets more complex the more you put in there, so a bit of credit to Bethesda. But the interesting thing with this world is how people try and survive. You're brought into it in a number of different ways. Like, for example, in 3, you started out in a vault. The vault's experiment was to basically keep everyone down there pretty much forever if they can. And you end up, obviously, sort of being in the middle of something where your dad wants to get out again because he's already been out, and you chase him across the entirety of, Washington DC. The world there, as you're brought into it, you are just a person living underground, away and safe from the radiation, and you have to adapt to a harsh world with creatures that you've never conceived of, because you've just been safe down here. No one's allowed out of Vault 101. No one theoretically is allowed in either, but we learn that that's not entirely the case. But no one should be entering or leaving, so like rat scorpions and things like that, and centaurs and super mutants are a weird idea to you, but you adapt. In survival, not the mode in other games, but the concept of survival, we have to adapt. This whole idea of survival of the fittest gets bandied around, but when you understand what it means, it's literally about what's fittest for the environment. This is why super mutants do well, and centaurs do well, and the various mutated creatures do well in this world, because they've adapted to the environment. This is what evolution is at its core. It's adaptation to the environment, so you are the fittest, or you fit best in the environment. Not, survival of the fittest, like, all these swole bros, or anything like that. That's not what it means. And it doesn't mean that, you come in and you make the world yours, like humans tend to do. Adapt the world to you. Survival of the fittest means you adapt to the world. And like I said, this is what we experience in Fallout 3. In New Vegas, it's a bit different again, because we've had, people from Black Isle in Obsidian, who have worked on the previous versions, pre-Bethesda's purchase. So they're taking it back in some ways, but the core idea is still there. Again, you're a courier who's been shot in the head, you're just trying to do a job. Again, the fact that society is trying to rebuild, you're trying to do a job as a courier, because people are always going to need things. In a world that, we no longer have the ability to just telephone people quite easily across long distances. We have radios, but it's a bit... It's not perfect, and as far as we can see, like, people don't have portable radios that much. There's ones in bars and things, but a Pip-Boy is the only way you're going to walk around with one a lot of the time, which is an interesting gameplay mechanic, so that we can always have radios, but that's all it is. So a good way of getting people information or things that you want to send them is employ a courier. Obviously, we see groups like the NCR, the Legion, Powder Gangers, even, Raiders. People band together and pursue whatever goals they want to fulfill. But you, as this courier, again, you've been shot in the head, you've lost a lot of your memory. Interesting gameplay mechanic. And again, you're finding yourself embroiled in this basically a war for Hoover Dam, for control of both water and power in a region. Because remember, water and power went down. The nuclear disaster ensured that. Everything went down. So when you've got something like a dam that can give you both power and water, whoever controls that controls the area that it's around. And this is what really the core endpoint of New Vegas is. And of course you can always side with Mr. House and just go, I don't care about you guys, NCR or Legion, I don't care about either of you. I'm claiming this for Mr. House, put it in private enterprise. So that's a different view. And of course the strip itself is, how society has tried to rebuild, tried to hold on to a former idea of itself. And then of course in Fallout 4, you're frozen for 200 years. So this is the one game that really has a more direct and definite tie back to pre-war society. You came from that. You were born before 2077. You're over 200 years old by the actual events in the main body of the game. You are just a human being from before the war who hasn't had to adjust. You haven't had a lifetime of getting used to, like, this is the world as it is. You've just literally gone from, the world's great, I've got a husband and a kid, to, well, one of them's dead now and one of them's kidnapped, then suddenly to, okay, everything's a bit weird, I need to get out of here, my house is gone, everything's destroyed, but my robot butler's fine. You know, everything has changed. War may never change, but the world does. And again, we're thrust into a similar situation as in 3. We have no knowledge of this world. Obviously we do as players, but to roleplay, we have no knowledge of this world. We are like infants ourselves. And we're coming to terms with all these different factions, you know, sort of vying for control throughout the game, and all these various people who, again, are rebuilding things like Good Neighbor and Diamond City, you know, big cities now. Unlike Megaton, which was kind of, it was medium-sized, but it wasn't like a massive establishment. But, you know, there are other places around, and like, obviously, you know, Tenpenny Tower and things, but, you know, you've got these two main locations now, but then a vast array of small settlements where people are like, I don't want to live in that society, I want to live out here, I want to tend to the soil myself, I want to grow these mutated fruits, like mute fruit, for argument's sake, and vegetables, and sustain myself. You know, and get some water purifiers maybe, you know, and obviously with Fallout 4 comes the settlements, like I say, but also the ability to build them. While in previous games you could see the world rebuilding after the apocalypse, you now have a hand in that. A lot of people, myself included, you know, aren't massive fans of the settlement system. It's an unnecessary thing, you know, it's like with Hearthfire, I barely touched that in Skyrim. But with the settlements in Fallout 4, I read something that really, I wish I could remember where I got it from, because I'd love to give credit, but I honestly can't remember. It was something I glanced at. But someone was saying, like, well, play it this way. You're trying to rebuild the world. What are you going to do? You're going to build it from the ground up. It'd be nice if you could, I mean, this is another suggestion that was made, I think it was on Reddit somewhere, if I remember rightly, you know, that you could actually have the various buildings around Boston, you could take them over, once you've cleared them of enemies. You know, have like a workshop bit in there and sort of build them up rather than having to do it from scratch. I think that's what a lot of people don't like, you know, having to do it from scratch and scrapping buildings and all that kind of stuff. Like Sanctuary, you know, it could take you ages to get looking how you want it because you've got to build it from the ground up. So maybe that's an idea for a future iteration. But once I saw that, you know, about, well, you know, you're trying to rebuild the world, it was like, yeah, this is 200 years down the line. We've done the whole, you know, everyone's fighting for survival, just do what you can to survive. Now people have banded together, and really it wasn't that long after that people started to do that, if we're honest, but people are banding together into settlements, into villages, into towns, into cities. They're coming together, sharing resources, sharing knowledge, sharing experience, sharing skills. Why shouldn't you have a hand in that? Particularly as you've come from the world where that was the norm. Everyone just had a place to live. We all had our role in society. It wasn't, you know, dog eat dog. And this is what the Wasteland wants now. Whether it's the Commonwealth, whether it's whether it's DC, whether it's California, Arizona, you know, wherever it is, people now want the world to be as close to it was, you know, as close to what it was as it can be. And I think that's what we take away from this, you know. There's all the fun, obviously, yes, you know, shooting people up, getting the bloody mess perk and seeing heads explode and killing insects because you're terrified of them, or running away from them in the glowing sea like some of us did. But that's the thing, you know, you can do all that, but at the core of it, this is a story of how does the world recover after a massive blast. We're led to believe the rest of the world hasn't fared any better. I'd love to see a Fallout in London, for argument's sake, or just the entirety of the mainland sort of Britain, you know, because it's, you could make a game world as that big, I'm sure. You know, I would love to see something like that, or somewhere else, you know, like Australia. Imagine like giant snakes and spiders and scorpions. Actually, I wouldn't play that, but it would be cool, you know, like, let's look outside of the US, because that'd be interesting. Now we've sort of seen how, like, the progression of the world from shanty towns in the first sort of couple to a start of rebuilding with, you know, sort of people grouping together into protected cities, to stuff like Diamond City, and the ability now to help smaller settlements grow and attract people to them, as well as obviously, you know, destroying evil people who want technology for themselves, or people who create machines to replace people and think that they're doing good. But this isn't a morality of the factions video. I'm not getting further than that. But, we've seen that world now. We know what the US's progression is like. It's only going to continue to perhaps get more developed. Or it could do a U-turn. That'd be interesting for maybe a Fallout 5. But maybe, like a side story, like in New Vegas, maybe sort of go, Fallout UK or something, or Fallout Australia, Fallout China, whatever you want, whatever country, it is, just somewhere we can see something different and see how different countries have reacted. Because it's nice to see like the concept of American exceptionalism, if you will, and their sort of drive to succeed working. How we see society rebuilding. But there's more than just one country in the world. Obviously, Right What You Know, many of Bethesda are US natives. It does make sense. They're familiar with the locations, and it's probably easy for them to scout. It's less costly than having to go to a different country. I respect that, but play with it, But I think that's the thing to take away, in a sort of summation. The thing to take away from Fallout is we do see through the course of a series how various factions, try to further their own ends, kind of as they do in the real world now. But the important thing is that people change, people grow, people adapt. People stake their claim on the world, even when the world is desolate and barren, and even when it's starting to come back a little. It's not a safe, comfortable world to live in. It's a fight for survival. And you need to learn what makes you special. So until next time, as always, take care.